a user completes their profile and hits save, or they answer a quiz question correctly on your app, you want to celebrate, right? And just get that confetti flying, make them feel really good about themselves. Now, there's libraries and other things you can add to be able to do this type of thing, but there's actually a lot you can learn by trying to do this effect with CSS only. And when I say CSS only, I mean no JavaScript involved whatsoever. It might not be the most practical use case at the end, but parts of this could definitely be used in production. But we're going to sort of start with some JavaScript and then slowly strip it away as we go through all of this. Just to, as I said, there's a lot of really cool stuff we can learn by doing that. And with CSS only solutions, that is an important thing to know, is they're not always something you might want to actually use in production, but there's something that you can learn a ton from. And fun things like this are just, there's so much fun to experiment with and play with and learn from. And then you get takeaways that you can use from these, and maybe you even want to implement something like this with CSS, how I'm going to show it. Though we will be using SCSS, and I'll talk more about that in a second. But let's just start off here where we have this button that's right there. And all we have is a button. It has some text and a span with confetti in it to start with here. Over in my styling, I haven't done very much. I just have a button with some general styling on it. That's it. We don't have anything else to start with. And I will say, actually, just before we dive deeper into this, there is a bug I came across while putting this together that drove me absolutely nuts. And it was only in one browser, but we'll sort of circle around to that at the end when I show you what the bug actually was, at how I figured it out. This video should have been recorded 3 days ago. I literally spent like a full day trying to debug this issue. But we'll talk about that more a little bit later on. For now, we want to focus on doing some fun stuff here. And actually, the very first thing I'm going to do is actually come up onto the body here, and I'm going to add a perspective, because I want everything to have this like 3D-ness to it. It's going to make the effect a lot better. So I'm just going to do a perspective of 1,000 pixels. I'm not a 3D expert king, but basically this means like we're 1,000 pixels away from the button. It's the distance to create the perspective. And this is just my general starting point, and if things don't look good, I change it, basically, is how I work with perspective. Then on the button itself, I'm also going to come here, and at the bottom, you can add it anywhere, but I'm going to do a transform style of preserve 3D. And this is just meaning like the button is living within that space of the entire body. The body is like our scene, and now the button is part of that scene. It's not an independent piece from there. At least that's how I understand the preserve 3D working. I just realized I'm doing this on my button. I have a party class, so I guess we should use the party class instead. Should work the same way. All right, so let's get the confetti done or started. So we're going to start with the confetti here, and we're going to just do, for now, a position of absolute. And because this has a position of absolute on it, we should come up onto our button and do a position of relative. Just to make sure that this absolute is relative to there. And I learned a lot of things from Amit, and one of the ones I liked, let's just add a background on here so we can see it, and I'll use yellow because it should stand out on my purple background. We'll give it a width of 10 pixels and a height of 10 pixels. We're going to get rid of that in a second, but I just want to visualize it on the screen for now. And you can see it has shown up. What I'm going to do now, though, is an inset of 50%, and it's going to go right in the middle. And so inset is top, bottom, left, and right of 0. So because they're all 50%, it just sticks it right in the middle. And we're going to be taking off this width and the height. It's actually going to be offset a little bit because it'd be the top right probably, and then it's overflowing out of that inset. But this is sort of going to be our container of where everything's going to explode from. So I'm just going to leave that like that for now and take this off, so we're not actually going to see it. It's going to have a width and a height of 0. So we're going to start with only one in here, and then eventually we're going to actually end up with a whole bunch more. This could be one thing you don't like about a CSS only solution, is each one of these elements does need to exist in your HTML. So maybe you're saying it clutters things up. You could also just have that populated using JavaScript, right, where you insert it when you need the animation to actually happen, is an alternative. But for now, we're going to see how we can do it without. So for that, we're going to say confetti, and then we're going to choose the span that's inside of there. And let's give this one, for now, we'll give it a width. Let's do like 25 pixels, just so it's a little bit bigger, and an aspect ratio of 1, so it should be a perfect square. This one's also going to get a position of absolute, which means it doesn't matter that it's a display inline, because the position absolute sort of does away with that. So this should work. And let's give it a background, and let's try orange-red this time. Just so we can see. There it is. Perfect. We're not actually going to see them when it starts off, so we could position these a little bit differently, but it should work for what we want. And if we need it to like come out the top instead of sort of more of the middle of the button, There's some changes that we could make to this here too. But for now, that's looking good. And so we're going to come here and we're going to create an animation. So let's say at keyframes. And for this one, I'm going to call it confetti spread. And for now, it's not really going to spread things. It's just going to shoot up our piece. But eventually, we're going to add the whole, like where all the different pieces spread out. So I'm going to call it confetti spread. And what we'll start with is at 25% of the animation, we're going to do a translate of, let's just say we want 0 on the x-axis, and up and down, let's just say -20 viewport height. So basically I want this to shoot up by 20 viewport height, maybe a 25 viewport height, at 25% of the way through the animation. And I actually want it to stay there through to the end of the animation. And this might look a little weird, but this is going to be an important part of how this is going to work. And I am using translate on purpose here and not the transform, and using translate inside of that. I'll explain why, and this is actually part of the bug. And it's not because of browser support not supporting this, it's something completely different. So now what we can say is we have our confetti span, and I said we're going to start with having some JavaScript, and we can strip away that JavaScript as time goes on. So let me just open, I have a main.js, and we'll look for our confetti. So const confetti, we'll say our confetti container is equal to document.query selector, and it will be our .confetti, right? So nothing too fancy going on there. Oh, and actually we're gonna have to see when the button's clicked on, so we'll do that too. We'll say const confetti button is going to be our document.query selector, and for that we can just have that be .party. And of course, if we did that, this doesn't have to be a document selector. This could be, we could find the confetti within our confetti button as well. And now we're going to say our confetti button, we can add event listener, and it's going to listen for when we click on something. And when we click on it, we want to, of course, do something. So let's say confetti, and we could do a class list confetti button, and we're going to do just the confetti container. Even we could do all this on the button itself instead of on the container. It wouldn't really matter, but we're going to strip all this away at the end. But say we have our confetti container. I could do my class list and then do a toggle. And I guess we can start with that. Or no, we're just going to do an add. We might as well do it the right way. So I'm going to do an add, and we're going to say explosion. So every time we click, it will add that, but of course we want to eventually remove the class as well. And so what we can do is once that animation is running, we can wait until it's finished and then remove that animation. So to be able to do that, we can stay on our confetti container, and we can do an add event listener. And for this time, instead of click, we're going to look for an animation end. And when we have an animation end, what do we want to do? We then want to do our confetti container, and then we can just do class list and have our remove on there, and then we can remove our .explosion. The only problem with this is every time we click the button, it will add a new event listener. I could just have this, I guess, passively listening all the time, but we don't need it listening unless we know the animation's actually running, so I don't mind adding it only when we click. But what that means here is we're just going to come here and we're going to say once is true, and that just means that it's only going to listen once this is listened, it's seen the animation end, it's removed the explosion class, that event listener will now be removed from the element, so we don't end up stacking a whole bunch of them on there. And here, I think for some reason, I must have gone too fast. There we go. I was just missing a little bit of stuff there. So that should work, and that just means if we come back to here, we're just going to say that our explosion has an animation, and our animation will be my confetti spread, and we'll say for 10 seconds. So if I click on it now, nothing is happening. Why not? Because I did .explosion on both of these instead of just explosion. So now if I click, there we go. You can see it goes up in the air. So we're exploding outwards very undramatically with one piece of confetti. Now, the other problem with this is we're rising up in the air, and then we're just floating there. And this is where it can be really hard to string different animations together, and it's why I've gone with the 25% and 100% here. So 25% will be 25% of our 10 seconds. So that's nice and easy. It's 2.5 seconds. So we have 2.5 seconds of it going up, and then it just sits there. The reason I want to bother with that, and then you can see eventually it drops back down because we get to that animation and event listener that we added. The reason I've done this though is because if we had to go up and then to like have it smoothly go up and then smoothly start coming down could actually be quite hard to be able to animate really well. I know for me anyway, I wasn't able to do it. So that's actually where I want to take advantage of this confetti here. So what I'm actually going to do is we're going to add this this confetti spread to the individual span inside and not on the thing that's exploding itself. So we're going to add it to this guy here. We're not adding it to this one here. And at first glance, if I save all these files, it's going to look exactly the same. But what the difference is now is when we have the explosion here, we could actually do something else. So we're going to say explosion. And on that one, we're going to do another animation. So we're going to say an animation. And for this one, I'm going to say confetti settle. So this is what's going to create the settling effect where it's going to drop down. And we'll say 10 seconds on this one as well. And now what we could do is at keyframes, confetti settle. And for this one, I'm just going to say 100%. And we're going to say a transform, translate X, translate Y, and let's just say it's going to be like 50 viewport height. And, you know, here I'm using the transform, here I'm using the translate. I could probably use the translate here as well. But now what this is doing is let's hit that, and you can see how it's coming back down now. And so that means let's turn this one off. So if I turn this one off, it's just going to drop straight down. If I turn this one off, and then we turn this one back on, it's going straight up. When we have both of them, this one is trying to pull it up, whereas the other one is moving down. But this is moving up much faster than this is moving down because we're getting to here at 25%. So we have that coming up, and of course we need to save this for this to work properly. Oh, there we go. And then it's coming back down. So we have that combination of them both going, and it just makes our life a lot easier to be able to try and animate these and get them working and having this nice smooth transition. Because what's basically happening is this one's moving up, but the whole box is moving down. This one slows down over time. The rising slows down over time, and then it just looks like it has this nice smooth animation. And then by both doing them on the scale of 10 seconds, you're not trying to line things up. And that was a big aha moment for me when Amit was showing me some stuff where I just, we're basing it all on the same animation with the same timing, but I'm just stopping this one 25% of the way through effectively. Makes life so much easier. Now, of course, we need this to be actually happening to a whole bunch of elements. So what can we do for that? Well, first of all, we need a whole bunch of elements. So I'm going to come here and say span, and we'll do a span times 49. So I have a total of 50 spans now that are within this element. Now, they're all going to be overlapping. It's not changing anything. It just does its own little thing like that. And it's not too dramatic or exciting. But we actually need all of these to be a little bit different and to be moving in different directions to have lots of different stuff going on. So once again, you could do a lot of this randomization through using JavaScript. But right now we can also do this with Sass or SCSS, and it's actually really easy to do. Now, I think the first thing we'll start with, just so we can actually see that it's working, because I was going to change their colors or their size, but if we're doing that first, we're not going to see them. Let's spread them out both vertically and horizontally, just so we can see them a little bit more. So we have this explosion span already happening here. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to do a for loop. So at 4, and we can say I from 1 through 50. So we're styling all 50 spans that are inside of there by saying and then here we're going to say we'll do an nth child. So we're saying our span and then the nth child, and then we can use this loop to go through and select each one independently. So here I can just do a pound symbol, and this is called interpolation, where we put the I in here. The I is a Sass variable, and Sass variables are normally used as values. So I could do like a 25 pixels, and then say that was my pixel value. I could just say pixels here or whatever, and that would work. But if I want to use a Sass variable inside either a selector, like we're doing here, or as a property, then we have to do interpolation, where we put the pound symbol and then wrap it inside of curly braces, so Sass knows to compile that to regular CSS. And so let's just come here now, and to start with, we'll do something really simple. We'll do a transform, translate Y. No, we'll start with X. Translate X, and let's just do I plus 10 pixels or something, just so it's enough. Of course, that's I was just looking, this is 25 pixels, so if we do this with 10, we're not really going to see it very much. So I'm actually, let's say I times 10, so it should spread them out by quite a bit. And now we don't see it because we're in the explosion, but when I click, we're going to see they all spread out, and maybe we'll up that a little bit so we can actually see the space. There we go. We can see the spacing between them all. I do have an overflow of hidden on the body, just so we don't end up with some scroll bars as these are exploding out. So just to say that. But there we go. When we click, they all spread out from one another. And each, so it's the I, so the nth child 1 would be 50 pixels, nth child 2 would be 100 pixels, nth child 3 would be 150 pixels, and so on and so forth. So now what we want to do is set up a bit of a configuration also to be able to like make these spread out, but also have some settings because it's going to make our life a little bit easier. We're doing this on the explosion, but I think it's eventually going to be easier anyway. I'm just going to come on the confetti span. This is the individual pieces here. Exactly the same thing, except now they're always spread out, and it's just going to add here. It's fine. It's going to make sense a little bit later on. But this is just within my confetti span, and that's just because I want to put my configuration here. I think it's going to make a little bit more sense. And so we're going to say horizontal max. It should be okay. And I'm going to go with 80 viewport width. So this is how much they're going to be spread left to right. So the most spread I want is a total, we can take up 80% of the viewport with how much it spreads. So from the middle, it'd be like 40 viewport width that way, and then 40 viewport width that way, total of 80. And this could be a little bit too much on larger screen sizes. But by having it as something we can configure up here, it's going to make our life easier. And this might be a little bit strange, but I'm going to come here and I'm going to use custom properties now. And I'm mixing up the Sass variables from custom properties because the Sass variables will be my how I'm setting them up. And then the custom properties are going to be how they're being used. And that might seem a little bit strange, but bear with me as we do this. And actually, I was going to put it here. We don't want it here. The custom properties, we want them to be in here. And the reason I want to do it in here is because we're going to take advantage of the randomization that we can happen. So every one of these gets a different value. So let's come here and we're going to say my offset on the x-axis. And for this, so I could just say that it's my horizontal max. The problem is then it's 80 VW and it's going to be the same for all of them, which is kind of useless. I want it to be different for every single one of these spans that are here. So what we're going to do is, actually I'm going to come all the way to the very top of my file, and I'm going to do it at use, and we're going to write Sass math. And this brings in, because I'm using a Sass file, this will work. This is included with Sass, but you can't use the math functions, the newer math functions, if you don't put this at the top of the file, basically. So it's a lot like using other files if you have partials, but in this case, it enables us to use the built-in math functions from Sass. And you might be using Sass where you haven't done that before. And in the older versions of Sass, you didn't have to, and a lot of those legacy things are still hanging around, so you could do some of the Sass math without having to bother with that. But I'm going to be using, I think it's a little bit different, the syntax I'm using, so if you're used to the old one, it might be a little bit different from what you're used to. Where I'm going to come here, I'm going to say math.random. The math random, if you don't put in a value, will give you a random number from 0 to 1 but within decimals. But say I put in 10, it will give me a random number between 0 and 10. And actually, because we're inside a custom property, to use any sort of Sass functionality within a custom property, you also need to use interpolation here. So everything I do here will be inside the interpolation, which is telling Sass to just do its magic on anything that's in here. And for this one, it's going to look a little strange at first, but we want to go to a horizontal max of 80. So 40 this way and 40 that way. But that means we need negative 40 this way and positive 40 that way. So to be able to turn this number into something that has negative 40 all the way up to positive 40, we're going to take this horizontal max and we're going to divide that number by 2. So we have horizontal max divided by 2. So this is going to give us a total of 40 at this point. And then from that, we're going to subtract a math random of horizontal max. If you're looking at this and you're confused, let's just come here and show us this is going to be equal to 80 divided by 2. So the 80 divided by 2 is going to be equal to 40. And then we're doing minus a random number with our horizontal max, which means that 80 divided by 2 is going to be 40. And then we're subtracting a random number here, but the maximum is 80. So 40 minus 80 would be equal to negative 40. If my random number ended up being 30, then this would be a positive 10. This could go all the way down to 0 or maybe 1. I'm not sure if it's 0 or 1, but then this would be 39, right? So we're getting the random number here is always ensuring that we're going, the farthest we can go left is negative 40 and the farthest we can go right is positive 40. So this is actually going to be really useful for us, and we're going to create a custom function in a little bit so we don't have to do it over and over again. But let's start with that. And then what we're going to do is on our animation, let's go down to the confetti spread down here. We can come on this 100%, and we're going to say that the end is going to have a transform of translate x And so then here we can have our var of offset x. And I can save on that. And so now when I click, look at that, they all move randomly. They're all doing their own thing. They're all going kind of crazy, and they're going to settle down. And we should, by the end of it, have about half of it, it's taking up about 80% of my viewport. Now, of course, that means we don't want to have any transform at the start. That one I had here, I can remove. So they all start at the same place. When I click, they're all going to slowly spread out randomly and take up approximately 80% of the viewport. Nice, right? I think that's pretty cool. And as you saw, it is random because when it was doing it before, like they were sort of shuffling all over the place. But yeah, there we go. That would work. Now we can do the same thing for the vertical. The one thing I will do differently for the vertical though, so here let's say vertical max is say 40 viewport height. Maybe that's gonna be too much. We'll see, maybe 35. We can play with these numbers again. So here we would come in with our offset y instead of an offset x. And once again, we will want a math random in here. So we're going to be doing SAS. So we have to come in with our interpolation. In this case, I'm not going to necessarily divide by 2, but you know what? Maybe we will to start with, and then we could play with it from there. Just because I think at this point, it's actually kind of useful to create a custom function. And that's just because here we have our horizontal max divided by 2 and then subtracting by this. And we're going to use this at least a couple more times. So for this, I'm going to just put it here with my confetti. Normally I'd have my function somewhere else. What we can do is an at function, and this lets you in SAS make your own functions. So at function, and I'm going to do half negative. It's not the greatest name. Maybe there's even a term for what I'm doing here, but I'm not a math person. So value. So basically the idea here is to do exactly what we did right here. So let's grab it from here all the way to here and copy that and bring it all the way up here. And we're just going to say at return. So it's going to output or return a value that is going to be the value. So here we're going to say our value, and over here we're going to say the value. So whatever number I plug into it, it's going to spit out the same thing, but split where half of it is negative and half of it is positive. So exactly what we were doing here. That means here, instead of writing all of this, I can just come and say half negative, and then put in it was my horizontal max. And then here I could come and do a half negative and do my vertical max. And by doing that now, we have that saved. Let's come down here. And so I know we have these translates here. I'm just going to add one here as well as part of my transform. And this is why I wanted to use the translate, because I wanted the motion of them going up to be really fast while there's other motions going on where I'm not worried about the different keyframes. So having the translate as its own property here is really, really useful to me. So we're going to do that. And then here we can say our translate y is my var offset y. And hit save on that. Prettier is just putting it all on one line. But now if we come and take a look, not only, there we go. Isn't that already looking better? We're getting it to be more and more like confetti by doing that. I think I'm actually going to increase this one to a negative 35 here. Just boost that up a little bit. So when we do it, it spreads out even more. There we go. I think that's looking a little bit better and a little bit more like confetti, where it's coming up and then sort of spreading and going down. So off to a good start already. So a small wardrobe change, because I ran into a problem with my original recording where the middle bit of it just vanished and I had some corruption and I don't know what happened. But we'll jump back to the original recording in a bit, but I've reset my VS Code to where we left off. So I'm going to get through all the parts that got mucked up in that original recording, and I'm going to try my best. The naming will be exactly the same. It is possible I end up with two things in a different order, so when we get to the later parts, they'll move, but everything should be exactly the same in how we're doing everything. So right now we have it, so everything is spreading out, and it looks nice like that, but we want now to add a little bit, make things a little bit more dynamic, and I think for me, the first thing is the colors. It sort of sucks that they're all the same. And so let's make those a little bit more interesting, and I'm actually going to create two different properties here to control the color. We're going to set a base hue, and I'm going to set it to 1 for now, and we'll just put a little comment here saying 1 to 360, and people can sort of figure that out, I think, on their own, right? To 360, and you could go bigger, I guess. It just, you're looping around the circle, so it wouldn't achieve a whole lot if we did that. The other one we're going to do here is we're going to have a hue variation, and the hue variation, once again, will be a 1 is equal to no variation, and we'll have a 360 is equal to max variation. And I'll talk more about that when we do the variation, but for now, let's come in with a 360 because we'll start with the maximum and sort of work our way through that. Now for me, I'm going to be declaring a lot of the properties just as regular properties here and just have the custom properties be the things that are being looped through. I could just include the background color here and set it all up there. I just like having this only showing me how they're being used, but there's not really a right or wrong way to do this necessarily. But what we're going to do here is for my background, instead of having it as our orange red, we're going to come here and we're going to do an HSL. And you could do this with RGB, would be a little bit harder. I wouldn't do it with RGB, but we could do it with an LCH if you're into that now. But we'll do this, and I'm just going to do a var of hue. And then here we'll do a 100% saturation, so it's very vibrant colors because it's confetti, and a 50% lightness value, which means it's just going to give us like the pure color. If you'd want, you could also have these as things that get randomized a little bit, or just, that could be controlled through the custom properties or the SAS variables here. Completely up to you. But I'm just going to leave these as sort of they're static, and it's the hue here that can get changed. And we'll just come right up to the top here and come in with what our hue is going to be. And so this number is always going to be a different one, but let's come in for now and say that it's just our base hue. We should see that it completely vanishes because it's a custom property, and that means that we do need to come in with interpolation, and there it's red. So if we do 150, I think that's more greenish. There we go. And then a 250 would be blue. So we can set our color through this. But obviously we don't want it to be only that color. We want the whole range of them. So one way we could do this is come in and we're going to say base hue. So we're starting at 1 or whatever number we want, and then we can subtract a number from there. So we could subtract a math random, which we're using our math random in a lot of different places, but we can subtract our math random and use the hue variation there. And it doesn't matter, I guess this could even be a plus and it would work as well. Going into the negatives or going into the positives would be fine. And so now each one of them should be a different color. Awesome. And this could work and this could be fine. The one thing I don't really like about it is, let's say we go up to 250, which is more of a blue, and let's do a variation of 100. So it's going to be a 100-degree variation. And because we're subtracting right now, what we're going to be doing is we're starting at 250, and all the variation will be in one direction, so it's moving in toward the greens. And for me, it makes more sense if the variation goes like, here's my base, and we're going to split the difference towards the two sides. Or, if this was a plus, instead of going towards the greens, we're going more towards the reds. So you can see either way would work completely fine. Just one way, we're only moving one way. The other one, we'd only be moving the other. And to be able to fix that, instead of doing this, we could do a half negative, and then use our hue variation right there. And now that means half of the variation will go one way and the other half will go the other way. And it just makes it a little bit more what you'd expect, I think, by doing that. And whether it's a plus or a minus here, it shouldn't make a difference because half the values are negative, half the values are positive. Actually, it probably does make sense that it is a plus. I'm not sure if it would make a difference or not, but I'll leave it as a plus because I know it's working. So if I did a 1, they're all going to be the exact same color. And if I did this again as a 360, we get the full variation of all the different colors coming through. And I'm just going to put the base hue to 1, but when you have the hue variation, the base hue doesn't really make a big difference. All right, the next thing with confetti is I don't think they should all be the same size. You get little bits of pieces of stuff, right? So we should have different sizes that are coming in here. And for this, I'm actually going to create 2 different variables. We're going to do a max width, and we're going to have a min width. And the min width, I'm going to go with 5 pixels, so we never get smaller than that. And the max, I'm going to say, is 25. And the way we're going to do this actually is do it in 2 different ways. So I'm going to come down here, and we're going to create a size, or I'm going to call it confetti size, confetti size, just because that's what I originally called it when I first recorded this, and I want to keep the same names. So we have the confetti size. And we can just come in with a math random. So we have to do interpolation to use any SAS over here. And I could do a math dot random and use my max width. The one thing with this is it's always unitless when we do this. So I am going to tack on the px here at the end. So we actually have a unit. And then of course that means here my width, instead of being that, for now, let's just come in with a var of confetti confetti size, and then we'll see how we're going to use our min value in a second. But if I do that, we should get a whole range, there you go, of different sizes. But you can see some of them are really, really tiny. Maybe you don't mind that, and that's fine. But the biggest ones will be 25, and the smallest will go down to 1 pixel, which in my opinion is too small. I'd rather, and even those big ones are a bit big. So we're going to go with a 20 as the biggest, and then a minimum of 5. Maybe there's a way to clamp it within here, but I'm just going to come on my width here and do a max function. And this is just native CSS for this, and we're going to have our confetti size, comma, and then our min width. And by doing that, what this is saying is choose the bigger of the two values. So if confetti size is 6, 7, 8, 10 pixels, that means it's bigger than 5, so it's going to use this value. If my confetti size is 2 pixels or 1 pixel or whatever, then this value is smaller, so then it's going to use the minimum width. So this one gets used, so the smallest they can possibly be is 5. So if we run it now, you can see there's that variation that's in there, but we don't have any of them that are those little tiny dots along the way, which is perfect. So I'm happy with that, but again, it's all there to be configured and changed if you'd like to. The next thing is they're all squares right now, which sort of sucks. It'd be nice if we could mix that up and have some circles and some squares instead. So let's come here and we're going to do shape. And shape's going to be kind of weird because I'm going to do 8.5. So I'll put a comment here saying that 0 is going to be equal to circles, that 0.5 is equal to a mix, and that 1 is going to be equal to squares. And so, and if you did like 8.25, it would be more circles, but with some squares in there. And if you did 8.75, it would mostly be squares with some circles mixed in. So, you can play around with that number a little bit if you'd like. And what we'll do here is this is going to get used as a border radius. And we have to do the random, so we randomize it on these. And this one's kind of interesting, so we'll just call it shape. And this was, I like this one here. So what we're going to use math random, once again, math random, but I'm not going to pass a value in here. And if you remember when I mentioned math random, it will, if you don't pass anything through in here, it's going to return a value between 0 and 1. And because it's doing that, what I'm going to actually do is minus shape here. And so we're saying a random value between 0 and 1 minus 0.5. And the reason this is useful is that means if this number is 0.5 or 0.6 or 0.51, whatever, anything bigger than 0.5, it will return a positive integer. And if it's smaller than 0.5, it will return a negative integer. And why that's useful is the way border radius works. Because with border radius, actually, what we're going to do here, let's set the whole thing up, and then we'll talk about how this is working. I'm just going to put this in parentheses because SAS does use order of operations, and we're going to do a multiplied by 100 VW. So we're either going to get a really big number, a positive value, or a very negative value because we're multiplying it by 100 VW. And that's good because when we have a border radius on something, so border radius, and we do my var shape, if the value is very big, it will be a circle. And that's also because they're squares right now with my aspect ratio, but this would make pill shapes if they weren't. But basically we're saying we either want it to be a circle or a square, because if you have a negative border radius, it's just going to not give you a border radius and you get regular corners on there. So that's breaking everything because I forgot a semicolon right here. And there we go, we can see it. Some of them are squares and some of them are circles. And we'll launch that again from the beginning so we can see it a bit better. And you get that mix. And if I were to come up here and make this a 1, all of them are becoming squares because we're doing math random minus 1. So this is always going to be a negative value because the 1 will always be bigger than anything here. So when we do times 100 VW, it's always negative. So then we don't have a border radius. Whereas if I did 0, it's the opposite. Math random minus 0 is always a positive integer, so times 100 VW, it's always going to be round, and all of them are circles. So I sort of like the mix of different shapes, so I'm going to go in with the 0.5 right there. And the last thing I want to do is add some depth to this. And part of the nice thing with the depth, like right now they're going up, they're coming down. We need to fix that. We need to make it pop and we need to get them spinning and stuff. But adding some depth this way, we have perspective set up and we're not using it. So that's what I want to do. And it also helps when they're falling because it's going to give us that perspective and it sort of makes it look like they're falling at different speeds, though they're not really. And so what we're going to do for that, a little bit like here, we had our horizontal max and our vertical max. I'm going to come in with a max depth. And I don't really know if I like this name, but it's what we're going to go with. And I'm just going to throw 500 pixels in there because I don't know. I just throw random numbers at it when I'm dealing with perspective, and then it becomes something you play around with. So this is like how far away or how close to us are they going to get. So we have our offset Y or offset X, and we can do exactly the same thing here. But this will be our offset Z, and that means this will be our max depth right there. And how are we going to use this? This is a lot like how we have our offset Y and our offset X here. We don't want them to be spread out at the beginning, so I'm not going to declare anything up here. Where we want this to happen is as the transform is happening, so we want it to start where they're all together, and then as it explodes, they're exploding this way, right? They're spreading this way, they're spreading vertically, and they're also going to be spreading away and toward us, I guess. So let's see if we'll put these on their own line. We'll see if Prettier lets us do this. And then we'll just come in with this last one, which will be our offset Z on our translate Z. It's not going to work yet. So when I hit save on that and I look, it's going to look exactly like it did before. There might be some fake depth going on here, but it's not really working. And the reason that's not working yet is let's come all the way up to our party button here. And we're going to put on this transform. And it's going to rotate it that way because we're in a 3D plane with our preserve. We have our perspective on the body. And then we have the preserve 3D here. And I think if we turn that off, it's going to... Oh, no, that's okay. I wasn't sure if it would still rotate it properly. But when I do this, you're going to see it's very flat. So we've added a Z index transform, but we're not actually getting it in the 3D space. And so we need this transform style to also be on the confetti right here. So just as a reminder, this has the perspective. This is living within that 3D realm because of the preserved 3D there. We need our confetti to also be in that same space. So we can add the transform style there. Hit save, and now when I do it, look at this, you're going to see that they're going to spread out around the button, both forwards and backwards, which is really cool. And that's happening because I am using that the half negative. So some of that's moving forwards, some of it's moving backwards, and that does mean that some of them are moving behind the button as well. So if we come and take a look, you'll notice that some of these do go behind the button and some pass in front of the button. If you wanted them only to explode toward the user and not also go backwards a little bit, then we could just get rid of the half negative and just have, just use the math random with your number. So then it's always only going forward. And with that, I think I'm actually going to boost this one up to like a 45 now. You can sort of play with these a little bit just to try, and it really depends on your thing. Maybe that's too high. Right now, the timing of everything is really terrible too. We're going to fix that because it's a little like, oh, they're going up. They're not popping out. We're going to fix that. But there's the last thing I want to add, which is actually what broke everything for me in that bug I talked about, where I want these to spin. Because if they're just floating, it's one thing, but like confetti should be moving around a little bit, right? And so let's come here. We're going to do a max spin. And I'm going to go in with 10 turns. So how many times are they going to spin around? And so turn is easier than saying like 2000 degrees or something like that. Now this one I don't really want a half negative, half positive, so I can just come here and do a spin is going to be a math.random of my max spin. So it's going to be anywhere from 0 to whatever value up to 10 turns. And then I can take that and we can add that over here as a rotate X and just do my var spin. So now when they go, they fly up and down. Let's see what might have caused that. Oh, that's an easy one to find. It's right there. And with this like this, as I said, the math random will strip units away. So here I'm just going to add turn to it. So now if we do it, there we go. They're all spinning. This will break if you're in Safari. And the weirdest thing, and this is why this will break in the current version of Safari up to the technical preview as far as when this is coming out. But if you had this as 180 degrees, it will not break in Safari. And I came into like a lot of bugs, 180. Oh, this should be degrees here. Maybe we could do something. I don't know. We have to put something there. But if the rotation is 180 degrees or less, you can get away with having a translate and a rotate X and everything is fine. in Safari. In 14 and 15, this would actually work. It's in 16.5 up until the technical preview. It's broken. I've actually filed a bug report with WebKit for this, especially because it was working. It seems to have regressed. Opacity will also completely break it. So if you have any opacity on here, the whole thing will just go out too. Or when you have a rotate X of 180 degrees or more and a translate as its own property. I'm pretty sure you can get away with the other translates. I do not know what would cause something like that. But just to let you know, that is a limitation. So if you're doing this and you're following along and you're in Safari, or you actually want to implement something like this, just don't go over 180 degrees. It looks much less exciting. So I'm going to leave the turns in there that are going to go much bigger. So let's just do this as, we can just say 10. And we're just going to assume it's always going to be in turns. So 0.5 would also work in all browsers, no problem. But I'm going to do a 10 on there because it's much more exciting when they spin around quickly and it looks a lot more fun. This could also be a use case for using the max function to make sure like this blue one doesn't seem to actually be spinning because I guess it got a 0 on there, or it did a little spin. We got like 1 spin in or 2 spins in, but you might want to set a min or a max, or maybe you just want them all to be 10. I do find if there's variation, it is kind of nice though. And just a little interruption as I'm going through all of this, and you're going, this is really cool with like custom functions and the way I'm using some of like the math random and some other stuff in here, and you'd like to learn more about Sass. I have a course called Beyond CSS that dives into the world of Sass, but not only looking at Sass itself, it builds up all the skills that you would need if you've never touched it before from zero, but then gets us working on actual projects, looks at project architecture, and then takes the next step from there to look at things like theming and design systems. And then it even gets into the idea of using what we're building with Sass with ideas like scope CSS, and then taking all of that and pairing it with a headless CMS and using Astro and a whole bunch of fun stuff. The course is available right now, and the link to it is in the description. And with that out of the way, let's dive right back into it. The one thing you will not be able to do, which I wish we could, because I would have liked the spins to actually be slow at the beginning as they pop out and then speed up as it's going on. But because of the way, if you try doing a rotate property here instead, it doesn't work because the rotate will happen before the transform, I think, and like the whole thing is just going crazy. You need this to be part of the transform property, and the rotate has to be at the end, because just to show you, let's put the rotate at the beginning. And the whole thing is just going to be like this weird, right? It's kind of strange. Because we're rotating it first, then we're doing the translates, rather than doing the translates and then rotating it, I think is how that works. So it gets really, really strange. So we need the rotate to be last. And when you did transforms like this, the order you do these in matters. Whereas if you use the individual properties, it's always going to be in a very specific order that usually makes sense. But in this case, we definitely need the rotate at the end. And just to show you, let's take this off from here and do it. Since I said it doesn't work, we can do a rotate here of, let's just say 20 turn, just so we have something on there. And it just goes kind of cool. It's not what we want it to be. So yeah, we're going to stick this over here. And the other thing that I'm going to do is on this one, so the settling, we should probably do something where it's at like 80%. We have an opacity of 1. And then over here, we do an opacity of 0. So that as this is going on, most of the time they're always there, but then right at the end, they fade away. You can't do this here again, because if it was in Safari, it would actually break the entire thing. So at least doing it this way and having it on the container that's doing the main movement, we can then lower the opacity on this container and you shouldn't have any issues anywhere. Now let's improve the pop animation. So to do that, the easiest thing to do is to open up your DevTools, come over and take a look at them and find where you have anything going on, where, let's find my animation that's on here. And actually let's click that. There's my animation. Oh, I don't have a timing function on there. So we never put one. So let's add a timing function to the spread. Let's just say ease in, so we have something on there. So then in my DevTools, what we can do is, if we find that animation, we can click on that ease in. And what I want to do is I want it to go really fast at the beginning, and then it's going to slow down. I don't necessarily, like if we go too high, it's going to speed up and then almost come backwards a little bit. So I don't really want that. I want it to sort of max out at about something just like, I think a 1. Actually, if we did a 0, 1, 1, 1, it's probably the best case scenario. So we know there's no backward movement there. So I'm going to grab that, and that will become my timing function here. And now if we watch it, oh, isn't that a lot better? it just explodes out and then comes and starts settling down over time. So much better. And I think I'm actually going to, that opacity fading out could actually start maybe a little bit easier or a little bit earlier. And maybe it's even too aggressive, you know, so you could definitely play with that and like ease this down a little bit. And so it's really this, it's 0, a number, and then the 1, 1, so it settles down properly at the end is probably your best case. So like maybe you could even map this to a, you know, another variable that's like intensity. So 0 would be like there's no real intensity. It's just going to slowly go up. 1 is the most intense without anything really strange happening. And then so this could be like a 0.75. So if you wanted to, you could do a note on that for the intensity of the animation. So it's still pretty, 0.75 is actually still pretty good. So I might stick with that, and then they all come and settle down. There we go. So that's looking pretty good, and I'm pretty happy with that. The one thing that is a little bit of an issue right now is obviously we see them right at the beginning. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to say that my confetti settle, I'm going to say at 0%, let's just come here, 0%, comma, 70% is going to be an opacity of 1. So it just keeps that entire time before it starts to fade out. And the advantage with doing that then is I can come up on my confetti right here, and I can just say opacity of 0. And we don't see it, but then as soon as I click, it's going to come into focus. So there we go. That's already a big improvement. And now the next thing that I want to take a look at is how we could do this without any JavaScript, which once again was Emmett who helped me out on this. I'd shared this, and then he's like, well, Kevin, what are you using JavaScript for? And I said, well, I need to add an animation and toggle it. He goes, you don't need JavaScript for that. So if we open up this, let's take this off and take a look at how we could do this. There's a few little interesting things here to be able to do it. So now if I click, I want the animation to actually happen. So how can we do that? Well, here, instead of putting these on that, I'm actually going to just have this on my .confetti, and this will be my .confetti span. So the animation is already on those elements. So when the page loads, the animation will fire, which is all good and dandy. The problem is now we can't click again. Like it's going only on page load, which is not what we want. So to be able to fix that, our button is called .party. So I'm going to say party active. And in this case, I can cheat a little bit because this is a span and these are all spans. So I can just say any span that's inside of there is going to have an animation of none. If you used classes or you didn't use spans or something else, you might have to have like a double selector here. But this means anytime I click on this, the animation gets removed, and as soon as I let go, the animation gets added again. As soon as an animation gets added to something in CSS, it will fire that animation. So now anytime I click on the button, we get the animation going off. So that's kind of cool. One thing actually, I didn't mention this, but because this is using Sass for all the random stuff that's coming into here, this is one drawback of Sass over using JavaScript, is these all get compiled. So every time this runs, it's going to look exactly the same. But if I hit save on this and it recompiles it, you can see as it's doing it, it's recompiling it. So every time the CSS is generated, the randomness will be applied. But once the CSS has been generated, you're always going to get the same confetti. So that is a little bit of a drawback of using CSS over JavaScript, where you could have it be random every time it's being fired. So I do want to throw that out there. But we're removing our JavaScript, so I'm not going to worry about that for now. So we have this going on. Now there's two problems. If the page loads, the animation will still fire. And what if we don't want people to be able to do this, where they can keep firing it every time it's going? So to be able to do that, we're going to have to create a new animation. So let's come down here. We're going to say at keyframes, and we're going to call it prevent animation trigger. And what this is going to be is a 0% and 100%. So for the entire time that this animation is running, we're just going to have a pointer events of none. And in CSS, that means something can't be clicked on if it has a pointer events of none. So how is that useful to us? Well, what we can say is, let's come all the way back up to where we had our buttons. This one, I want the party active actually. And here we have the active. I'm going to sort of group it with this, I guess. We're just going to say party, and there is a limitation to this that we're going to see in a second. I'm going to say party, and it's going to have the animation of prevent animation trigger, and it's going to run for 10 seconds. So basically, our party is going to have that, but then we're also going to do a .party active is going to actually, we can combine that. We can just put a comma here. So it's when the party is active, it's going to remove that from it. So if I click on it, our animation will run. And the reason we need this here is because we need to add that animation back in, because once 10 seconds is run, it's going to be finished. We need to remove it and then add it back in while the animation's happening. So if I click now, you can see it's running. But if I try and go on here, there's no pointer events. I can't click again for the next 10 seconds because the animation is running. Now this is a little bit awkward in that the button, and you can see now it worked again, and now it's frozen again. It's a bit awkward on something like this that you might want to spam, but if it was like a form submission, you get the poof, you know, you don't want it like triple clicking or whatever anyway. 10 seconds is also really long, so there is that, you know, it could be a little bit annoying. All right, now the last thing we want to do is prevent this from happening where the page loads and the animation fires. And this is the weirdest one, but also really, really cool. So there is a limitation to it, but what we'll do is let's come all the way up to the top here. And we're going to set a custom property. It could be on your router HTML. I'm just going to put it here. And it's going to be a preload duration. And it's going to be 0 seconds long. And this might seem kind of weird, but you'll see what's happening here in a second. And this one has to be at 0 seconds for this to actually work. And basically what we're going to be doing is running all of the animations right off the start, but we're going to be giving them a timing of 0 seconds. So as soon as the page loads, the animation just goes to the end. And then what we're going to say is we're going to come here, we're going to say add keyframes, and we can call this preload animation. And on that one, we're going to say A2, and our preload duration is going to go to an onset, which means it's no longer going to be anything. We're going to remove this 0 seconds from here, basically. And so this might look really weird, but trust me, for what we're going to do here, we just need to make sure this animation is running. So we're going to say animation is going to be my preload animation here. And we're going to have it happen 1 millisecond, like just super quickly, but the important thing is the delay. And the delay here should match how long the animation that we're trying to prevent is. So I'm going to say 10 seconds there, and I'm going to write forwards, and the forwards here is also really, really important. The reason forwards is important is when we get to the end, we want it to stay there, and we don't want it to go back to what it was. So if it went back, if we did it for 0 seconds, it would get to the end and then go back to the start and be back at 0. Whereas now it's going to run the animation after 10 seconds, and then get to this onset stage where we're going to go to the fallback. So this, again, might seem really weird, but let's come all the way down now. And where we used our animations, we're going to replace these with our var animation duration and do our preload duration. And then we're going to put 10 seconds here. And we're going to do the same thing, var preload duration, comma 10 seconds. And this could be definitely a custom property or a SAS variable that could replace all of these 10s to make it a little bit easier. And so what this is doing is this is starting here at 0 ms, right? So we're starting at 0 seconds. The animations are going to happen instantly. So this is the preload duration. So they instantly happen, but then we're going to wait 10 seconds. And after those 10 seconds have gone by, we're going to onset that value. And by unsetting it, it means it no longer exists on our body because that's where the animation's happening. And that means when we get to this preload duration, this value has no value anymore. It can't find anything on the body, so it's going to fall back to this 10 seconds. So for the first 10 seconds, let's refresh our page. The page loads, nothing happens because the animations happen instantly. And we're going to be locked out for 10 seconds from clicking on anything. But then once we can actually click on that and the animation fires. And the animation will work every single time now. The big downside of this is it means that you cannot run the animation if you have a long one like we do now for 10 seconds before it's actually going to work, which is definitely a bummer. So I don't know if it's the best use case in this specific situation, but because I learned about it, I thought it was really interesting, and it means we don't need any JavaScript whatsoever to be able to do something like that. I just thought it was really, really interesting. And if you had shorter animations than this, it could definitely be something that you used. You know, if it's a little micro interaction that's 500 milliseconds, that's fine. Then you can definitely use this type of thing to have an animation on something that just doesn't get loaded that first time the page loads. But for now, it does mean that we're locked out. But again, like the idea with this is they're filling out a form and then they'd have to click the button anyway. And so, you know, now we've completely avoided using JavaScript for this. At the same time, you're probably submitting something. You filled out a form or you did a little quiz and then you're hitting the thing and the confetti's going off and it's awesome because they're celebrating, but you'd have some JavaScript doing something along the way there as well. So it's not saying that like you'd have to build this entire thing out, but this entire idea, like we saw with this preloading animation, or being able to use this half negative and creating our own functions using Sass, or doing the math random. And there's so many useful things that we can do here and fun things we can do with it. It doesn't mean that in production, a JavaScript solution wouldn't be more useful or a little bit easier or practical in some situations. But you could take this and get a lot of lessons from this that you might be able to use in production because they could be useful. So I know some people like to like poop on CSS only solutions, and do be careful. Sometimes they can be really inaccessible, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't try them. They can be really fun to experiment with, really fun to build stuff out like this, and really fun to learn a lot from, even if it doesn't mean that the final result is ever going to end up on a production website. And I do think like a faster one like this, you could definitely have most of this implemented with CSS only on your site. I don't mind this idea of having a ton of spans in here if I needed it, though, maybe you're inserting all of those with JavaScript, like I mentioned earlier, and then you're doing some other stuff with it from there. But if you did enjoy this video and you do like this idea of building things with CSS only as a learning tool, or because you want to do some fun stuff with it, you might also enjoy this video that is right here. And with that, I would like to thank my enablers of awesome, Andrew, James, Michael, Simon, Tim, and Johnny, as well as all my other patrons for their monthly support. And of course, until next time, don't forget to make your corner of the internet just a little bit more awesome.